Hi guys, happy Thursday. All right, so here's what we have for today. First of all, I want to remind you that your FRQ practice from yesterday, that's due today. So make sure you do that. You actually need to write it up. You need to submit it, turn it into me. Okay. Best thing you could do is also share that with a peer, like I said, and have them look at it and see what they thought of your writing. We need to practice those. You're going to see that kind of FRQ on that exam on May the 11th, and it's going to be worth 60% of your exam score. Okay. So here's what we're going to do today. What I've done is I've gone through our very first unit. Remember, the exam will cover information on units 1, 2, and 3. I've gone through our first 3 units, and I have stripped away everything that basically isn't 100% necessary. I put together this presentation, which I'll share with you on our classroom. It's basic. It's as basic as I can. Basically, what I've done is I've taken 3 chapters, chapters 1, 2, and 3, and I got it down to like 16 slides. Okay. So it's literally as basic as I can. There's no background color. There's nothing flashy. There's no images. It's just the facts and nothing but the facts. And I'm going to do this for all 3 units, because even though the exam's going to be the exam's going to be 2 FRQ questions, you're still going to have to know the concepts, especially for one FRQ is going to be opinion-based, like we practiced yesterday, but the other one's going to be about concepts. So we're going to go through this real quickly here. 6 slides for 3 chapters. I'm impressed with myself. You should be too. All right. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through this and see how long this takes us, but we're going to go through it pretty quickly. Don't freak out about not being able to keep up with notes. I'm sharing this document with you so you can basically take those notes whenever you need it, okay? The very first thing we talked about is, remember, this whole unit is called the underpinnings of the U.S. government. So it just talks and gives you the definition for government. Government is the instructions and process through which policies are made. So government officials make the policy, and then the instructions, how we do it, that's what government is, okay? Policy is basically the action we're going to take in regards to a problem. I don't know, let me just take something off the top of my head. Let's say we have a pandemic going on. Maybe the policy is that we're going to have a safer at home, declaration made by our governor. Could be made by the president, but it hasn't been. So that's the policy that they made to take. That's the course of action they basically decided to take regarding this particular problem, right? All right, democracy. All different types of democracy. People like to argue and debate about it. When we're looking at democracy, we're talking about a type of government where policy is supposed to reflect what the people want, right? That's the idea behind it. A direct democracy means that each person gets to vote individually on an issue. We don't have that very often in the United States. You might see it at some small town, local level type of thing, but we don't really see it at the federal level. There's just too many people for it to be effective. Instead, what we usually see is a representative democracy, where we elect people to represent us in the federal government. We elect the president, we elect the senators, we elect members of the Congress, of the House, and their job is to represent us. So we're more of a representative democracy when it comes to democracy. The 5 characteristics you'll see of most democracies, of a good democracy anyways. Number 1, there should be an equal right to vote. Everybody who can vote should be allowed to vote, okay? There are going to always be some kind of restrictions, age, that type of thing, but it should be the bare minimum. And the dangerous thing that I hear in our society a lot today is people talking about like making it more complicated or difficult. Anytime you mess with somebody's ability to vote, that's a dangerous thing. You're talking about their constitutional right, okay? Number 2, opportunities for political participation. Everybody should participate in politics one way or another, or a large number of people should be able to, either running for office, voting for people and running for office, working for somebody, or volunteering for somebody who's running for office. Being able to have a voice in it, all these things are part of that political participation. Number 3, enlightened understanding. Making sure that people actually understand the issues that we're talking about in the day, the big controversies, the big problems and issues that we're having right now. Number 4, citizens' control of the agenda. It should be the people. If it's a democracy, it should be the people who are dictating what the government is working on, focusing on, drawing their attention to. They should control the agenda, not the other way around. And then last is social inclusion, making sure that everybody in our society is included, okay? Here we go to these big 3 theories. Remember these things? We've talked about them several times, and if we had basically gone through Unit 4 and 5, we have talked about them again. Pluralist, elitists, and pluralism or hyperpluralism. The pluralist theory is the idea that the political system is composed of competing interest groups, and that's causes power to be decentralized, so no one group has too much influence. They think it's a great thing. You get people who are pro-choice, you get people who are pro-life, and then because there's no one group has more power than the other, everything works out great. Elitist theories believe that that the money is where the power is. That people who are wealthy either have the power, or at least they have the access to the people who have power, and they have way too much influence over government. Hyperpluralist or pluralism theory is those with basically they think there's just so many different groups out there that government has become ineffective because anytime they try to pass any kind of legislation or policy or rule or regulation, there's too many competing issues on each side, competing groups on each side, that then nothing really gets accomplished. Anything that they might pass just basically doesn't have any real teeth to it. Challenges to democracy. We have a lack of expertise. We have extremely complex issues in this country, and the average citizen can't possibly understand something as complex as, a trade agreement we might make with China, for example, right? There's limited participation. We don't have enough people basically participating in the political process, and we see this with voter turnout. It's extremely low in the United States, crazy low, right? High campaign costs, and a crazy amount. We're talking about over $1 billion was spent in the last president. Actually, it was almost $2 billion that was spent in the last presidential election. Senate races, House races, these are all getting more and more expensive, and we're seeing the same thing trickle down to the state races, governors, states, congresspersons, and even, unfortunately, we're seeing it in the state judicial level. Diverse political interests. We just have so many different groups. We have so many different causes, so many different people with connections, and we're just seeing a political gridlock where nothing gets done. And part of that is because we have such a divide right now between the left and the right. Okay, the American political culture. This is something we talk about. Like, these are things that we typically associate with the culture of the United States when it comes to politics. Liberty, the idea of freedom. They can never take our freedom, although that is from a Scotsman. But the idea of give me liberty or give me death, which some states like to put on their license plates, right? Egalitarianism, all men are created equal. The idea that everyone should have equal opportunity. A free market. It's interesting to talk about some of these things during a pandemic. A free market, that basically prices are determined by the supply and demand. There you go, toilet paper. Laissez-faire, government should have their hands off until these big, huge issues happen, right? And then also, we don't want laissez-faire, but laissez-faire usually means government hands off, usually with the economy, but it can mean it in different areas too. And then populism, the people over the elite. The idea that this is the government of the people, by the people, for the people, as Abraham Lincoln said. Okay, the origins of the Constitution. Remember, this is just going back to, gosh, I hope it was 8th grade history. I don't remember when you guys had this. But remember, we were controlled by the British. We didn't like what the British were doing to us, especially about taxation, especially taxation without representation. That was the key. And we basically ended up fighting a revolution over it. We created the Declaration of Independence, this beautiful document that you were supposed to have read, and you rewrote it as a breakup letter that lists all of the grievances that we had against King George. A lot of that was influenced by the writings of a guy named John Locke, who basically talked a lot about the power of the government comes from the people. We then basically threw off the shackles of Great Britain, of the most powerful government in the world, and then we said, okay, now what? So we had to then create our very own government, and we created something called the Articles of Confederation. Huge fail. And the reason it failed, it was as we were just so worried about having too strong of a federal government that we gave too much power to the states. We were not a united states. We were basically a loose connection of states, and that's actually what confederations mean. So the federal government, under the Articles of Confederation, we had no judicial branch, we had no executive branch, we had a one body or unicameral Congress. They couldn't regulate trade, they couldn't raise taxes, they couldn't create currency. They had to rely upon all of this from the states, and it just basically was a mess, and it did not work. So they said, let's go fix it. And instead of fixing it, they threw it out. And at the Constitutional Convention, they basically created a brand new form of government based on the United States Constitution, right? Um, this is where we've talked about the Constitution. You've read through it. It's another one of your foundational documents. The idea was the government's supposed to, reflect the interests of what the majority of people want, but at the same time, trying to do this balance where it's also supposed to protect the rights of the minority individuals. Um, the big issues at the Constitutional Convention was equality. There were groups that basically wanted to get rid of slavery. There were the southern states that knew they needed to keep slavery in order to be influential and powerful and to keep their economy going. There were some individual rights issues. They were worried about the government being too big. We talked about that Connecticut plan for establishing a bicameral Congress so that it would make the big states happy with the, having more power in the House, and the little states would be happy by having as much power in the Senate as the big states. Individual rights we just kind of mentioned, but the concern was, of course, that this government's going to be too big, too powerful, and they kind of cut the legs out of that argument by making sure they penned the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, our Bill of Rights, to basically says what government can't do, right? This idea of Madisonian model, James Madison, our state capital is named after, wanted the power to the people to a point, but not too much. But he had this idea of the Electoral College, choosing the president instead of having the individual vote choose the president. We have the checks and balances. We have the federal system, which we'll be talking about more, where we have some powers are granted to the federal government, some are granted to the state, some are shared by both. And we're seeing good examples of federalism right now, right? Here's that system of checks and balance. We went through this. You guys have done this before. All right. So in order for the Constitution to take effect, we had to get it to be ratified, to pass. We had to have enough states to pass it. We had the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists wrote a ridiculous number of papers. You get to read a number of them, or at least pretend like you read some of them. And then you basically were, they were published in the local newspapers, supporting the Constitution, explaining why, making sure people understood what exactly was in the Constitution and how it would protect their rights and how it's the right thing to do. The Anti-Federalists basically thought the Constitution basically favored the elites, that it gave too much power to the federal government, that we'd basically be right back in the same problems we had with the British. Now, spoiler alert, the Constitution passes, it becomes our new form of government, right? We've been running with it ever since. Now, what we also talked about then was how do we fix it? How do we change the Constitution? Our founding fathers knew that they were going to make mistakes, that they basically couldn't foresee everything. And so they created a way that we could change or fix the Constitution. They didn't make it easy, which is not a bad thing. But they basically made it, complicated, but still possible. In order to propose, remember there's two words here, propose versus ratification. In order to propose an amendment, it would take 2/3 vote by both the House and the Senate. In order for it to get ratified, you have to have 3/4 of the state legislators or the states in the convention. But most likely it's going to be the state legislators. Basically have to pass it. So 3/4 of the state. All right. Federalism. We're seeing this now. Government divided into more than one level: federal, state, local. Venn diagram, think of, right? Where the federal government has certain powers, state government has certain powers, and local governments have certain powers. The federalism decentralizes the government powers. It allows more public involvement. It allows us to have greater access to government, especially at those lower levels. You're never going to be president, right? You probably are never going to be a member of the House or the Senate. You could be on the school board. You could be on Kimberly's, village board. Those type of things, and it allows us to have a function at all levels, just in case the needs of the people in the village of Kimberly, Wisconsin, might be different than the needs of the people in Compton, right? What we're also seeing here, with the concept of federalism right now, is we're seeing the battle between right now the president and a number of governors dealing with this epidemic. We're seeing kind of the messiness that can come out of federalism too, where we have certain states that basically are sheltered at home and having lockdowns, in other states that haven't done it yet. And yet the people in those states can travel to the states that have the lockdowns. and you can see that the problems that arise there. Okay. Now, what is the basis of federalism? It's in the Constitution. There's a couple of different places it comes in. It comes in under the supremacy clause that's found in the Constitution that says that the federal government, basically the national government, trumps the state government with their laws. That's actually one of the clauses in the Constitution. It comes in, you see it in the 10th Amendment, that basically says that grants all powers not given to the federal government to the states. So we see the states getting some powers there. We have enumerated powers these are powers that are specifically located and placed in the Constitution. It's literally a list in Article 1 that basically says powers granted to Congress. And it also has in there powers granted to the states. And then we have implied powers. It's not specifically stated in there, but it's implied that the Congress has this power to do it, or the federal government has that power to do it. That's why we have a minimum wage, right? That's part of the implied power. Congress gets to regulate trade. And since they get to regulate trade, one of the things we use for trade is our salaries, and so they get to regulate the salaries. All right. Intergovernment relationships today: dual federalism, cooperative federalism, fiscal federalism. Remember all these? Federalism, dual federalism, let's start there. Each level of government has a distinct responsibilities and they don't overlap. We don't see that as often here in the United States. We have more of a cooperative federalism where levels of government share the responsibilities. And we also have fiscal federalism where we see the federal government has a huge purse strings. They have a lot of money and they can distribute that to the states. And we saw that with the coronavirus relief bill that gave money to local small businesses, large businesses, individuals, and also gives money to the states. States have declared states of emergency, which gives them access to federal funds and also lets them bypass some laws and regulations that currently exist and all this kind of fun things. So lots of federalism going on in the world right now today as we watch what's happening with the coronavirus. So that's it. That was the entire 3 chapters, and I have no idea how long I've been talking, but it seemed like it went pretty quick. So we're going to do this for all 3 units. Unit 2, that's our big one. That's where we look at the 3 branches. That one, we'll see what I can do as far as narrowing that down a little bit. But it's good to review your notes and information that we've covered on this stuff. So take a look at what you've covered in chapters 1, 2, and 3. It should reflect what we basically just talked about here today. And make sure you turn in your FRQ practice there that we gave you yesterday. I will talk about this a little bit more, but I'll write it out there too. Usually on Fridays, we've been doing the West Wing Friday thing. I'd like to do that again. This next episode that we're going to watch is actually, it was an extra long episode. It's like an hour and a half long, kind of ending up with that cliffhanger that basically ended season 1. We pick up right where that left off. So, all right, we will talk to you guys tomorrow. If you have any questions, let me know, and make sure, like always, be safe, wash your hands.